Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Terence Sanford had built his empire from nothing. 3 generations of construction work condensed into one man's relentless ambition. At 58, he controlled the largest concrete and steel operation in 3 states, with projects ranging from skyscrapers to government installations. His weathered hands bore the scars of early years working rebar and pouring foundations, but his mind held the blueprints for a business empire worth $40 million. The Sanford construction compound sprawled across 50 acres outside Phoenix, housing everything from cement mixers to industrial demolition equipment. Workers knew Terence as fair but unforgiving. Cross him once, and you'd never work construction in Arizona again. Those who earned his loyalty, however, found themselves with job security that lasted decades. Terence's wife, Janice Jennings Sanford, had died 8 years ago from cancer, leaving him to navigate the complexities of fatherhood alone. Their daughter, Melody Walls, had been 24 then, fresh from college, idealistic and determined to make her own way in the world without relying on her father's wealth. Melody had inherited her mother's kind heart and her father's stubborn streak, a combination that led her to volunteer work and social causes. She'd met Thomas Allison at a charity fundraiser, where he'd presented himself as a successful real estate developer with a passion for community service. Their courtship had been swift, passionate, and completely convincing. Terence had reservations about Thomas from the beginning. Something about the man's smile never reached his eyes, and his stories about business deals changed depending on the audience. But Melody was 26, in love, and adamant about her choice. When Terence hired a private investigator to look into Thomas's background, Melody discovered the surveillance and cut off contact with her father entirely. "I won't have you controlling my life like one of your construction projects," she'd screamed during their last conversation. "Thomas loves me for who I am, not what I'm worth." The wedding had proceeded without Terence's blessing or presence. Thomas's family, the Allisons, had money from old Phoenix real estate, the kind of generational wealth that came with social connections and political influence. They welcomed Melody with open arms, praising her for bringing stability to their troubled son. For 2 years, Terence had respected his daughter's wishes and stayed away. He sent birthday cards that went unanswered, Christmas gifts that were returned unopened. His attempts to reconcile were met with silence orchestrated by Thomas, who convinced Melody that her father's toxic masculinity was damaging to their marriage. But blood called to blood, and Terence's patience had limits. The breaking point came when one of his foremen, Albert Costello, mentioned seeing Melody at a grocery store. "Boss, I hate to say it, but your daughter looked rough. Real thin, jumpy around her husband. When I tried to say hello, the guy dragged her away like she was in trouble for talking to me." That night, Terence made a decision that would reshape multiple lives. If Melody wouldn't accept his protection willingly, he'd provide it without her knowledge. Within a week, he'd established surveillance on the Allison family compound, infiltrated their social circles, and begun documenting everything about their operations. What he discovered made his blood run cold. The Allison family business wasn't legitimate real estate development. It was a sophisticated money laundering operation with connections to human trafficking networks. Thomas wasn't a successful businessman. He was a sociopathic criminal who targeted Melody specifically because of her father's wealth and her own isolation from family support. Worse, the surveillance revealed that Melody's marriage was actually a form of systematic abuse designed to break her spirit and make her compliant. The Allisons specialized in acquiring young women from wealthy families, marrying them off to family members, then using psychological manipulation and physical isolation to create perfect victims. Melody had become their latest acquisition, and Terence had unknowingly delivered his daughter directly into their hands by pushing her away with his investigation 2 years ago. The guilt nearly broke him. But Terence Sanford had never broken anything in his life. He built things, fixed things, and when necessary, demolished things that couldn't be saved. The Allison family had just become a demolition project. Chapter 2. Surveillance and Secrets. The Allison compound sat on 12 acres in Paradise Valley, surrounded by high walls and manicured gardens that concealed its true nature. From the outside, it appeared to be nothing more than an affluent family's estate. Multiple buildings connected by covered walkways, a main house that could accommodate 50 people, and enough privacy to conduct business without interference. Terrence spent 3 weeks mapping every entrance, exit, and security measure. His construction background gave him unique insights into structural weaknesses, while his business connections provided access to industrial equipment that could breach any barrier. More importantly, his network included former military personnel who brought specialized skills to his payroll. Albert Costello had served 2 tours in Iraq as a combat engineer before joining Sanford Construction. When Terrence explained the situation, Albert didn't hesitate to volunteer his expertise. Within days, they'd assembled a team of 6 men, all veterans, all completely loyal to Terrence, and all with skill sets that complemented the mission. "Boss," Albert said, reviewing thermal imaging of the compound, "they've got at least 4 women living in that back building. Movement patterns suggest they're restricted, always escorted, never alone, windows barred from the inside." The surveillance equipment Terrence had purchased could penetrate walls and provide real-time intelligence on the compound's activities. What they discovered was a systematic operation designed to imprison and exploit vulnerable women under the guise of traditional marriage. Melody wasn't the only victim. Thomas's cousins, Bert Riley and Jerome Burke, had each married women who'd subsequently disappeared from their previous lives. The women were kept in a separate building, allowed out only for carefully supervised activities, and subjected to constant psychological manipulation. "It's a goddamn cult," Albert observed. "They're using marriage as legal cover for human trafficking." The electronic surveillance revealed the full scope of the operation. The Allisons had connections with similar groups in 6 states, trading women like commodities and using their legitimate business fronts to transport victims across state lines. Local law enforcement was either corrupted or intimidated into looking the other way. Terrence's surveillance team identified the key players in the operation: Rick Small, Thomas's uncle and the compound's security chief, a former police detective who'd been fired for excessive force complaints. He maintained relationships with corrupt officers throughout the Phoenix area. Gabriel Hayes, the family's spiritual advisor, actually a defrocked minister who used religious manipulation to break victims' resistance. He conducted counseling sessions that were actually psychological torture. Wesley Green, Thomas's father and the operation's financial coordinator, who managed the money laundering network through shell companies and offshore accounts. Maxine Miranda, Thomas's mother and the compound matriarch, who supervised the female victims and ensured their compliance through a combination of drugs, threats, and psychological manipulation. The most disturbing discovery was the basement area beneath the main house. Thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures in what appeared to be holding cells, rooms too small for comfortable habitation, used for punishment and breaking resistance. "Jesus Christ," Albert whispered, studying the thermal readouts. "How many people are they holding down there?" "Too many," Terrence replied, his voice carrying the deadly calm that his employees had learned to fear. But not for much longer. The surveillance also revealed that Melody had been pregnant twice since her marriage. Both pregnancies had ended in early miscarriages that medical records suggested were induced rather than natural. The Allisons were controlling even her reproductive capacity, determining when and if she would be allowed to carry children to term. That discovery activated something primal in Terrence's nature. He'd failed to protect his daughter from predators, but he wouldn't fail to extract her from their grasp. The final piece of intelligence came from infiltrating the compound's communication systems. Terrence's team discovered that the Allisons were planning to expand their operation, using Melody's connection to Sanford Construction as leverage to acquire new victims from other wealthy families in the construction industry. Thomas had been systematically gathering information about Terrence's business associates, identifying men with daughters who might be suitable targets for future recruitment. Melody was being used as bait to lure other victims into the family's web. "They're not just holding her," Albert concluded after reviewing the intercepted communications. They're using her to hunt others. Terrence studied the compound layout one final time, committing every detail to memory. The Allisons had built their operation on the assumption that their victims' families would either be too ashamed to act or too intimidated by their wealth and connections to fight back. They had chosen the wrong family to target. Chapter 3. The Point of No Return. The decision to act came when Terrence's surveillance team intercepted communications revealing that Melody was being prepared for a special assignment. The Allisons had arranged for her to attend a construction industry gala where she would identify potential targets among the attendees' daughters. If she refused or failed to perform adequately, the punishment would be severe enough to ensure future compliance. The communications included medical discussions about corrective procedures that made Terrence's hands shake with rage. "They're going to break her completely," Albert reported. "After this, she'll either be completely compliant or completely broken. Either way, we lose any chance of getting the real Melody back." The gala was scheduled for Saturday night. Terrence made his decision on Wednesday morning, standing in his office overlooking the construction yard where 3 generations of Sanford men had built their legacy. "We go Friday evening," he announced to his assembled team. "Full extraction, complete elimination of threats, and total destruction of their operation." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Terrence's construction company maintained contracts with the city for infrastructure maintenance, which provided legitimate access to utility systems throughout Paradise Valley. A planned emergency repair would shut down power to the Allison compound, forcing them to rely on backup generators that could be overloaded remotely. During the power outage, Albert's team would breach the compound's perimeter and neutralize security while Terrence located Melody. The operation would appear to be a coordinated home invasion by professional criminals, giving law enforcement a plausible explanation for the violence that would follow. "What about witnesses?" asked Danny Hansen, the team's communications specialist. "There won't be any," Terrence replied with finality. The Allison family business ends Friday night. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected complication when Melody herself appeared at the construction company offices. Terrence's secretary, Crystal Head, recognized her immediately despite the dramatic changes in her appearance. Melody had lost at least 30 pounds since the wedding, her clothes hanging loose on a frame that had once been athletic and strong. Her eyes held the glassy look of someone heavily medicated, and she moved with the careful precision of someone expecting punishment for any mistake. "Daddy," she said uncertainly, as if unsure he would recognize her. Terrence's carefully controlled rage nearly broke free, seeing his daughter reduced to this shadow of herself. But he maintained his composure, knowing that any emotional reaction might trigger whatever psychological conditioning the Allisons had imposed. "Hello, sweetheart," he said calmly, rising from his desk. "It's good to see you." Melody's carefully rehearsed speech dissolved into tears as she collapsed into his arms. For 30 seconds, she was his little girl again, seeking comfort from the man who'd always protected her. Then the conditioning reasserted itself, and she pulled away with mechanical precision. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice artificially steady, "for cutting you out of my life. Tom has helped me understand that family is important, and I want to make things right between us." The words were clearly scripted, but underneath the false delivery, Terrence could see his daughter fighting to communicate something else. Her eyes kept darting toward the windows, and her hands trembled despite the apparent calm of her voice. "I'm glad you came," Terrence replied carefully. "I missed you. Thomas wanted me to invite you to dinner this weekend," Melody continued. "At our home. He's eager to meet you properly and discuss some business opportunities." The invitation was obviously a trap, the Allisons planning to eliminate the one person who might investigate their operation too closely. But it also presented an opportunity that Terrence hadn't anticipated. "I like that," he said. "When would be convenient?" "Saturday evening," Melody replied, relief flooding her features. "Thomas will be so pleased." After she left, escorted by a man Terrence recognized as Burt Riley, the construction team gathered for a final strategy session. The dinner invitation changed everything. Instead of a nighttime assault, They could conduct a coordinated operation during a social gathering when the entire family would be present. It's perfect, Albert observed. They'll have their guard down, thinking they're in control of the situation. Terence studied the compound blueprints one final time, marking entry points and escape routes. The Allisons had spent years building their criminal empire, confident that their wealth and connections made them untouchable. Friday evening, they would discover that some foundations, once cracked, cannot be repaired. They can only be completely demolished and rebuilt from scratch. Chapter 4. The Dinner Invitation. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect Arizona sunset that made Paradise Valley look like its name suggested. Terence arrived at the Allison compound precisely on time, driving his personal vehicle rather than one of the company trucks. He wanted to appear as a concerned father accepting his son-in-law's olive branch, not a man planning systematic destruction. The compound's main house was impressive, Spanish colonial architecture with modern security features disguised as decorative elements. Guards posed as groundskeepers, surveillance cameras were hidden in landscaping, and the entire property radiated the kind of casual wealth that came from generations of accumulated power. Thomas Allison greeted Terence at the front door with practiced charm. At 34, he was handsome in a way that suggested good genetics and expensive grooming rather than honest work. His smile was perfect, his handshake firm, and his manner completely artificial. "Mr. Sanford," Thomas said warmly, "I'm so glad you could join us. Melody has been looking forward to this all week." "Thank you for having me," Terence replied, studying the man who'd stolen his daughter. "I appreciate the opportunity to get to know you better." The interior of the house was decorated with expensive art and furniture that created an atmosphere of refined sophistication. But Terence's trained eye noticed the subtle modifications: reinforced doors, windows that couldn't open from the inside, and sight lines that allowed constant surveillance of anyone moving through the space. Melody appeared from the kitchen wearing a dress that had clearly been selected for her rather than chosen by her. She moved with the same careful precision Terence had observed at his office, every gesture controlled and monitored. "Daddy," she said, embracing him with manufactured enthusiasm. "I'm so happy you're here." The embrace lasted long enough for her to whisper 4 words that confirmed everything Terence suspected. "Help me get out." Dinner was served in a formal dining room where Thomas's family had gathered to meet their guest. The assembled group represented 3 generations of criminal enterprise disguised as respectable society. Wesley Green presented himself as the family patriarch, a distinguished man in his 70s who spoke eloquently about community service and charitable giving. In reality, he was the architect of the trafficking operation and personally responsible for the systematic abuse of dozens of women over the past 30 years. Maxine Miranda played the role of gracious hostess, ensuring everyone's comfort and guiding conversation towards safe topics. Her motherly demeanor concealed a sadistic personality that took pleasure in breaking young women's spirits through psychological manipulation. Rick Small was introduced as the family security consultant, a former law enforcement professional who now helped protect their privacy. His presence at the dinner table was intended to intimidate Terence while demonstrating the family's connections to legitimate authority. Gabriel Hayes attended as the family's spiritual advisor, offering prayers before the meal and discussing the importance of traditional family values. His role in the operation was to provide religious justification for the abuse while convincing victims that resistance was sinful. The conversation during dinner was carefully choreographed to present the Allisons as successful, respectable people who'd welcomed Melody into their loving family. They spoke about business opportunities, community involvement, and shared values that emphasize traditional gender roles and family hierarchy. "Melody has been such a blessing to our family," Maxine said, patting Melody's hand with possessive affection. "She's learned so much about being a proper wife and daughter." "Thomas has been wonderful for her," Wesley added, "very patient in helping her overcome some of the independent habits she developed before marriage." Terence listened to their carefully crafted lies while observing details that revealed the compound's true nature. The dining room had no interior door handles. Occupants could only leave if someone outside opened the doors. The windows were decorative glass blocks that provided light, but no visibility or access to the outside. Even the silverware was counted after each course, ensuring nothing could be taken that might serve as a weapon. "I understand you work in construction," Thomas said, steering conversation toward business. "We've been considering some property development projects that might benefit from your expertise." "What kind of projects?" Terrence asked, playing his role perfectly. "Specialized facilities," Rick interjected, "the kind that require absolute privacy and security. We've found that successful families need safe spaces where they can conduct business without interference." The implication was clear. They wanted Terrence to build facilities for expanding their trafficking operation. His construction expertise would help them create more sophisticated prisons for future victims. "That sounds interesting," Terrence replied. "I'd be happy to discuss specifics." As dinner concluded, Gabriel offered to give Terrence a tour of the property, ostensibly to show him potential development sites. The real purpose was to demonstrate the compound's security measures and subtle intimidation. "We value privacy very highly," Gabriel explained as they walked through corridors lined with doors that opened only from the outside. "The modern world can be dangerous for traditional families." "I can understand that," Terrence agreed, noting the location of every security camera and locked door. The tour concluded in Wesley's office, where the family patriarch made his intentions clear. "Mr. Sanford, your daughter has become very important to our family's future plans. We'd like to ensure that you're comfortable with her new role and willing to support our shared objectives." "What role is that?" "Melody has unique insights into your business network," Thomas explained. "The construction industry includes many successful families with daughters who might benefit from the kind of guidance we provide." They wanted Terrence to provide access to potential victims, young women from wealthy construction families who could be targeted for recruitment into their trafficking network. In exchange, they offered business partnerships and financial opportunities that would make him complicit in their crimes. "That's a very interesting proposition," Terrence said carefully. "I need to consider all the implications." "Of course," Wesley replied, "but I hope you understand that family loyalty works both ways. Those who support us prosper, while those who oppose us experience difficulties." The threat was delicately phrased, but absolutely clear. Cooperate, or face the consequences that had befallen other family members who'd attempted to interfere with their operations. As the evening concluded, Terrence embraced his daughter goodbye, accepting her whispered message, "Basement. Tomorrow night. They'll move me if you wait." The Allisons watched him drive away with satisfied expressions, confident they'd successfully recruited another collaborator. They had no idea they'd just provided a detailed reconnaissance of their compound to a man planning their complete destruction. Chapter 5. The Rescue. Sunday afternoon brought unseasonably heavy storms to Paradise Valley, providing perfect cover for what Terrence had planned. The rain would mask sounds, limit visibility, and give his team legitimate reasons to be working on infrastructure repairs throughout the area. At 6 p.m., Albert's crew shut down power to a 6-block area surrounding the Allison compound, using legitimate city maintenance protocols to avoid suspicion. The outage would appear to be storm-related, giving them a several-hour window before power company crews would investigate. Terrence approached the compound from the north, using construction equipment to breach the perimeter wall at its weakest point. The storm provided cover, while his team's night vision equipment negated the Allisons' advantage in familiar territory. The compound's backup generators activated as planned, but Danny Hansen's electronic warfare equipment overloaded their circuits within minutes. The resulting darkness was absolute. No streetlights, no security systems, no communication networks. Albert's team moved through the grounds with military precision, neutralizing guards and cutting communication lines. Rick Small never had a chance to coordinate resistance. He was unconscious before he realized the compound was under assault. Terrence moved directly toward the main house, following the route he'd memorized during the dinner tour. His destination was the basement level Gabriel had carefully avoided showing him, where thermal imaging had detected multiple heat signatures in confined spaces. The basement entrance was hidden behind a bookshelf in Wesley's office, secured with electronic locks that had failed when the power went out. Terrence descended into a corridor that belonged in a prison rather than a family home. Concrete walls, steel doors with food slots, and the unmistakable smell of fear and desperation. He found Melody in the third cell, chained to a wall and wearing clothes that were little more than rags. She was conscious but barely responsive, her eyes unfocused from whatever drugs they'd used to keep her compliant. "Melody," he whispered, checking her pulse and breathing. "It's Dad. I'm here to take you home." Her recognition was immediate despite the medication. "Daddy? Is it really you?" "It's me, sweetheart." Terrence examined the chains holding her, industrial-grade restraints that required specialized tools to remove. "I'm going to get you out of here." The bolt cutters he brought made quick work of the chains, but Melody couldn't stand without support. Whatever they'd given her had affected her coordination and muscle control. "There are others," she whispered urgently. "In the other rooms. They've been here longer than me." Terrence checked the adjacent cells and found 3 more women in similar conditions: Jerry Byers, Sally Bauer, and Alyssa Bender, all reported missing over the past 18 months. They were barely conscious, severely malnourished, and clearly traumatized by months of systematic abuse. "Albert," Terrence spoke into his radio. "I need medical evacuation for 4 victims. Severe condition." "Copy that, boss. Area secure. Local law enforcement response time is 20 minutes. That gave them enough time to complete the operation and disappear before official investigation began. But as Terrence helped Melody toward the exit, she grabbed his arm with desperate strength. "Dad, wait," she gasped. "There's something else you need to know." "What is it, sweetheart?" "I'm pregnant," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "With Thomas's baby. They said if I tried to escape or contacted you, they'd hurt the baby. That's why I couldn't fight back." The revelation hit Terrence like a physical blow. His daughter had endured months of abuse to protect her unborn child, sacrificing herself to save an innocent life. The courage that required was beyond anything he'd imagined. "How far along?" he asked gently. 6 months, she replied. "They've been planning something horrible. Gabriel said they're going to take the baby after it's born and give it to another family in their network. They never intended to let me keep it." Terrence helped his daughter up the stairs while processing this new information. The Allisons weren't just trafficking women. They were operating a baby-selling network, using forced pregnancy to produce children for wealthy buyers who couldn't adopt through legitimate channels. In the main house, Albert's team had secured the remaining family members. Wesley, Maxine, Thomas, and Gabriel were flex-cuffed and sitting in the living room under guard, their comfortable world transformed into a nightmare of professional violence. "Dad, please," Thomas begged when he saw Terrence enter with Melody. "We can work this out. Whatever you want, money, business deals, anything." Terrence studied the man who'd imprisoned his daughter, noting how quickly his charm had evaporated when faced with real consequences. Thomas Allison had never encountered genuine resistance to his predatory behavior until tonight. "Actually," Terrence said calmly, "there is something you can give me." Chapter 6, The Reckoning. What Thomas Allison couldn't give Terrence was time. Time to undo the psychological damage. Time to restore his daughter's shattered trust. Time to return the 6 months of her life that had been stolen through systematic abuse. But he could provide something equally valuable: complete information about the trafficking network's operations. Terrence spent the next hour extracting detailed confessions from each family member, using psychological pressure and implied threats to overcome their resistance. Gabriel Hayes, the supposed spiritual advisor, proved most willing to cooperate when faced with the reality of criminal prosecution. "We have facilities in 6 states, Gabriel admitted, his religious facade crumbling under pressure. "Phoenix, Las Vegas, Denver, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, and Tucson. Each location handles 8 to 12 women at any given time." "Who are your buyers?" Terrence demanded. "Wealthy families who can't adopt legitimately," Wesley answered when Gabriel hesitated. "Politicians, business leaders, anyone with money and connections, but criminal backgrounds that disqualify them from official adoption agencies." The scope of the operation was staggering. Over 20 years, the Allison Network had trafficked hundreds of women and sold dozens of children to buyers throughout the western United States. They'd operated with impunity because their clients included judges, police officials, and federal agents who protected the network in exchange for personal favors. The children, Melody whispered from where she sat receiving medical attention from Albert's team medic. What happens to them? Maxine's maternal facade disappeared completely as she answered with clinical detachment. Most are sold to families who raise them normally, but some are kept for future recruitment when they reach appropriate age. The implications made Terrence's vision blur with rage. The Allisons weren't just trafficking women and selling babies. They were creating a generational cycle of abuse that would continue indefinitely unless completely destroyed. Names, Terrence commanded. Every buyer, every official, every location, everything. Thomas tried one final manipulation. You don't understand the power these people have. If you expose this operation, they'll destroy you. Your business, your reputation, your life. They have resources you can't imagine. So do I, Terrence replied quietly. Albert's team had been recording everything, documenting confessions and gathering evidence that would destroy the network completely. But Terrence had no intention of relying on law enforcement to provide justice. Too many officials were compromised, and the legal system moved too slowly for his taste. The Allison family would face a different kind of justice. At 11 p.m., Terrence made his final decision. The storm was intensifying, providing cover for what happened next. Melody and the other victims were transported to a private medical facility where they would receive treatment away from official scrutiny. The evidence was copied and distributed to journalists, federal agencies, and victim advocacy groups who would ensure its public exposure. The Allison family compound, however, would suffer a tragic accident. Gas leak explosion, Albert reported as they prepared to leave. Common during severe storms when old infrastructure fails. The entire main house will be destroyed, along with anyone inside. What about the other facilities? Terrence asked. Simultaneous operations, Albert confirmed. Our contacts in each city are moving tonight. By morning, the entire network will be eliminated. Thomas made one final desperate plea as Terrence prepared to leave. She's pregnant with my baby. You can't take her. That child is part of our family. The words triggered something primal in Terrence's nature. This man had tortured his daughter for months, stolen her freedom, and planned to steal her child. Now he claimed parental rights to justify continued abuse. Melody herself provided the final revelation that sealed Thomas's fate. Dad, she whispered, her voice strengthening despite her physical weakness. The baby isn't his. Terrence turned slowly, his expression deadly calm. What? They were using me for breeding, Melody explained, tears streaming down her face. Multiple men. They said it was more profitable if the father's identity was unknown. Thomas just claimed ownership because he was my husband. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The Allisons weren't just trafficking women. They were operating a breeding program, using rape and forced pregnancy to produce children for sale to the highest bidders. The marriage ceremonies were legal fiction, providing cover for systematic sexual abuse. Thomas's face went white as he realized his claim to parental rights had just been exposed as another layer of his family's criminal enterprise. There would be no mercy, no negotiation, no possibility of survival. Albert, Terrence said quietly, execute the final protocol. The explosion that destroyed the Allison compound would be attributed to storm damage, causing a gas leak in aging infrastructure. The deaths of the family members would be tragic, but explainable, a wealthy family caught in their home when natural disaster struck. Local law enforcement would find evidence of the trafficking operation scattered throughout the wreckage, leading to investigations that would destroy the network's political connections and expose decades of corruption. The buyers, officials, and collaborators would face exposure and prosecution as evidence emerged from multiple sources simultaneously. Some would flee the country, others would commit suicide, and a few would face trial and imprisonment. But for Terrence Sanford, justice would be measured in simpler terms. His daughter was free, her child would be born safely, and the predators who terrorized his family would never threaten anyone again. Chapter 7. Reconstruction. 6 months after the Allison compound explosion, Melody gave birth to a healthy daughter she named Janice, after the grandmother who'd never lived to meet her. The delivery took place at a private facility in Colorado, far from the media attention surrounding the trafficking investigation that had dominated national news. Terrence held his granddaughter for the first time in a hospital room that looked nothing like the basement cell where he'd found Melody. The baby's eyes were bright and alert, showing no signs of the trauma her mother had endured during pregnancy. "She's perfect," Melody whispered, her voice stronger than it had been in months. Completely perfect. The recovery had been slow but steady. Melody had spent weeks in specialized therapy, working with professionals who understood the complex trauma of trafficking victims. The physical wounds had healed, but the psychological scars would require years to fully address. Terrence had hired the best specialists money could buy, ensuring his daughter received treatment that addressed every aspect of her experience. The team included doctors, therapists, security professionals, and legal advocates who worked together to rebuild her life from the ground up. "How are you feeling?" Terrence asked, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Strong," Melody replied, surprising them both with the conviction in her voice. "Stronger than I've been in years." The trafficking investigation had exceeded everyone's expectations. Evidence from the Allison compound had exposed corruption in 6 states, leading to the arrests of over 200 individuals, including judges, police officials, politicians, and federal agents. The network's client list read like a who's who of Western political and business establishments. Terrence's role in the investigation was carefully obscured. Officially, he was a concerned father who'd hired private investigators when his daughter disappeared. The investigators had uncovered evidence of the trafficking network and reported it to federal authorities, leading to the coordinated raids that destroyed the operation. The explosion at the Allison compound was ruled accidental, caused by storm damage to aging gas lines. The timing was unfortunate but not unprecedented. Severe weather frequently caused infrastructure failures in older buildings. No one suspected that Terrence Sanford had personally orchestrated the systematic destruction of a criminal empire that had operated for decades. His reputation remained intact. His business continued to prosper, and his family was safe from further threats. "Dad," Melody said, interrupting his thoughts. "I need to tell you something." "What is it, sweetheart?" "I remember everything," she said quietly. "Every detail of what they did, what they planned, how the operation worked. I want to help make sure it never happens again." Terrence had hoped the trauma might fade with time, allowing Melody to move forward without carrying the burden of detailed memories. But his daughter had inherited his determination along with his refusal to accept injustice. "What do you have in mind?" "A foundation," Melody explained. "Using our resources to identify and eliminate trafficking networks before they can establish themselves. Prevention instead of just rescue." The idea had merit. Terrence's construction business provided legitimate access to properties and infrastructure throughout multiple states. His network of contacts included law enforcement, military veterans, and security professionals who could identify suspicious activities. "It will be dangerous work," Terrence warned. "So was building our business from nothing," Melody replied. "So was raising a daughter as a single father. So was infiltrating a compound to rescue kidnapped women." She was right, of course. The Sanford family had never chosen the safe path when the right path was available. Fighting human trafficking would be consistent with their values and provide constructive purpose for the rage that still burned in both their hearts. "We need to be careful," Terrence said. "Official channels, legal methods, cooperation with legitimate authorities." "Of course," Melody agreed, "but also backup plans for when official channels fail. Some predators only understand one kind of justice." 3 days later, Melody brought baby Janice home to a house that had been transformed into a fortress. Security systems monitored every approach, bulletproof glass protected all windows, and safe rooms provided refuge in case of emergency. Terrence had learned from his failure to protect his daughter. It wouldn't happen again. The Sanford Foundation for Family Protection was established with $50 million in initial funding, making it one of the largest anti-trafficking organizations in the country. Its mission was simple: identify, investigate, and eliminate human trafficking networks before they could harm additional victims. The Foundation's board included law enforcement professionals, military veterans, victim advocates, and business leaders who brought diverse expertise to the mission. But the real power remained with the Sanford family, who provided resources and oversight for operations that sometimes exceeded legal boundaries. Melody resumed her education, earning degrees in criminal justice and social work while raising her daughter. Her first-hand experience with trafficking provided insights that academic study couldn't match, making her an effective advocate for victims and a feared opponent of predators. Terrence continued operating his construction business, but increasingly used it as cover for Foundation activities. Building projects provided access to suspicious properties, while his network of employees served as eyes and ears throughout the region. The Foundation's first major operation targeted a network in Nevada that specialized in recruiting young women from Las Vegas casinos. The investigation took 8 months and resulted in the rescue of 15 victims and the arrest of 37 perpetrators. Unlike the Allison case, this operation was conducted entirely through legal channels with full cooperation from federal authorities. But Terrence's team provided investigative resources and tactical expertise that official agencies couldn't match. "We're making a difference," Melody reported during a Foundation board meeting. "But there's so much more work to do." The trafficking networks were adapting, using technology and international connections to stay ahead of law enforcement. Fighting them required resources, expertise, and commitment that few organizations could provide. But the Sanford family had all three in abundance, along with personal motivation that made failure unacceptable. Chapter 8: Blood and Betrayal. 2 years after establishing the Foundation, Terrence received intelligence that threatened everything he'd built. Albert Costello brought the information personally, his expression grim as he entered Terrence's private office. "Boss, we've got a problem," Albert began. "Someone's been asking questions about the Allison operation. Detailed questions that suggest inside knowledge." "What kind of questions?" "Technical details about the compound's security, timing of the explosion, evidence that was supposedly destroyed in the blast." Albert handed over a file. "The questions are coming from Jonathan Hodge." Terrence's blood went cold. Jonathan Hodge was his nephew, his late brother's son, who'd worked for Sanford Construction for 5 years before starting his own competing business. Jonathan knew enough about Terrence's resources and capabilities to piece together what had really happened at the Allison compound. "What's his angle?" Terrence asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Blackmail," Albert confirmed. "He's been struggling financially since starting his own company. His business is failing, and he owes money to some very dangerous people." The file contained evidence of Jonathan's investigation, photographs of the destroyed compound, interviews with surviving witnesses, and financial records showing payments to private investigators and corrupt officials. He'd been building a case for months, gathering evidence that could destroy Terrence's reputation and expose the Foundation's activities. "How much does he know?" "Enough to be dangerous," Albert replied. "He can't prove you were directly involved, but he can raise enough questions to trigger a federal investigation that would end the Foundation and probably result in criminal charges." Terrence studied the evidence while considering his options. Jonathan had always been ambitious, but lacked the vision and determination needed for success. His father, Terrence's brother, had died in a construction accident when Jonathan was 15, leaving him bitter about the prosperity the main family line had achieved. "Has he made demands?" "Not yet," Albert said, "but our sources suggest he's preparing to approach you with some kind of deal. He wants to be brought into the Foundation operations as a full partner." The irony was bitter. Jonathan wanted to profit from the same activities he was threatening to expose, demonstrating the same moral flexibility that had characterized the Allisons. Family blood, meant nothing when measured against personal greed. What about Melody? Terrence asked. Does she know? Not yet. But Jonathan's been asking questions about her recovery and the baby. He knows she was pregnant when rescued, and he's trying to determine if there are additional vulnerabilities he can exploit. The threat to his granddaughter activated every protective instinct Terrence possessed. Jonathan wasn't just threatening the Foundation. He was endangering an innocent child who'd already survived more trauma than any baby should endure. That evening, Terrence met with Melody at her home to discuss the situation. Baby Janice was sleeping peacefully in her crib, unaware that her peaceful existence was threatened by family betrayal. Jonathan was always jealous of our success, Melody said after Terrence explained the threat. Even before Mom died, he resented that we had more opportunities than his family. I could pay him off, Terrence suggested. Give him enough money to solve his immediate problems and hope he disappears. Dad, you know that won't work? Melody replied. Blackmailers never stop demanding more. And Jonathan knows too much about our capabilities. He'll always be a threat. She was right, of course. Jonathan's knowledge made him permanently dangerous, and his willingness to threaten his own family demonstrated that moral appeals would be useless. What are you suggesting? Melody's answer revealed how completely her traumatic experience had changed her. The same thing you do to any other threat, she said calmly. Eliminate it permanently. He's family. So are Thomas's cousins, Melody pointed out. Family connections didn't protect them when they chose to enable abuse. Jonathan is making the same choice. The parallel was accurate but painful. Bert, Riley, and Jerome Burke had been Thomas's cousins, men who'd participated in the trafficking operation despite family relationships. Their deaths in the compound explosion had been necessary to protect future victims. Jonathan's betrayal was following the same pattern. Family member choosing personal profit over innocent lives. The Foundation's work had already saved dozens of trafficking victims, and Jonathan's threat could end those operations permanently. There might be another way, Terrence said, though he didn't believe it himself. Dad, look at me, Melody commanded, her voice carrying the authority she'd developed during her recovery. Jonathan is threatening your granddaughter's safety to profit from criminal activity. What would you have done to the Allisons if they'd made the same choice? The answer was obvious, and they both knew it. Terrence had killed the entire Allison family to protect his daughter and eliminate their threat. Jonathan's betrayal merited the same response, regardless of blood relationship. How? Terrence asked quietly. Construction accident, Melody suggested. Jonathan's been struggling financially, cutting corners on safety protocols. Equipment failures happen when proper maintenance is deferred. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jonathan's construction sites were notorious for safety violations, making an industrial accident completely believable. Terrence's connections could ensure the investigation concluded with equipment failure rather than sabotage. Albert's team can handle the technical details, Melody continued. Make it look like cost-cutting led to tragedy. Jonathan becomes a cautionary tale about the importance of safety standards. 3 days later, Jonathan Hodge died when a crane collapsed at his construction site, crushing him instantly beneath several tons of steel. The accident was attributed to deferred maintenance and inadequate safety inspections, common problems for struggling contractors trying to minimize expenses. The investigation revealed that Jonathan had been using equipment beyond its recommended service life, ignoring manufacturer warnings about structural fatigue. His death was ruled accidental, caused by his own negligence rather than external sabotage. Terrence attended the funeral, playing the role of grieving uncle, while internally accepting that family betrayal could never be tolerated. Jonathan had chosen his path, and the consequences were inevitable. The Foundation's work continued without interruption, protecting vulnerable women and children from predators who counted on society's indifference. Some threats required legal solutions, others demanded more direct intervention. But Terrence Sanford had learned that blood relationships provided no immunity from consequences when family members chose to enable evil. Love was earned through loyalty, not inherited through genetics. Chapter 9. Legacy. 5 years after the Allison operation, Terrence stood in his office watching his granddaughter play in the construction yard below. Janice was 4 years old now, confident and curious, showing no signs of the trauma that had marked her earliest months. She climbed on equipment with the fearlessness of a child who'd never known real danger. Protected by security measures she didn't even notice. Melody had become the Foundation's public face, speaking at conferences and congressional hearings about trafficking prevention. Her firsthand experience gave weight to testimony that academics and law enforcement couldn't match. She'd testified before 12 state legislatures and 3 congressional committees, helping pass laws that strengthened penalties for trafficking crimes. The Foundation had evolved into a sophisticated operation with offices in 8 states and partnerships with federal agencies. They'd rescued over 300 victims and dismantled 18 trafficking networks, always working within legal boundaries when possible, but maintaining capabilities for situations that required more direct intervention. "Dad," Melody said, entering his office with the quarterly reports. "We need to discuss the Montana situation." The Montana operation involved a network of survivalist compounds that were actually fronts for trafficking operations targeting Native American women. The criminals used remote locations and anti-government rhetoric to avoid law enforcement scrutiny while systematically abusing vulnerable victims. "What's the latest intelligence?" Terrence asked. 47 women and children in custody across 6 facilities, Melody reported. Local law enforcement is compromised. The sheriff's department is receiving payments to ignore obvious signs of trafficking. Federal involvement? FBI is interested, but concerned about jurisdiction and tribal sovereignty issues. They want to build a case slowly, which means months of additional suffering for the victims. Terrence studied the satellite photographs of the compounds, noting defensive positions and escape routes. The survivalist groups had military-style training and equipment, making any rescue operation extremely dangerous. "What's your recommendation?" "Direct action," Melody replied without hesitation. "We have assets in place and legal justification under federal trafficking laws. The victims can't wait for bureaucratic solutions. The operation would require careful coordination between Foundation resources and federal authorities. Albert's team would provide tactical expertise while FBI agents handled legal procedures and evidence collection." "Timeline, 2 weeks, Melody said. "We need that long to position assets and ensure victim safety during extraction." As they discussed operational details, Janice's laughter echoed from the yard below. She was playing with the children of other employees, all of them protected by the same security measures that had become routine in Terrence's world. "She's going to ask questions eventually," Melody observed, following his gaze. "About what happened to me, why we have so much security, what the Foundation really does." "What will you tell her?" "The truth," Melody replied. "That some people hurt others for profit, and good people have to stop them. That sometimes stopping evil requires more than good intentions and legal procedures." It was a harsh lesson for a child, but Janice would grow up understanding the realities that most people prefer to ignore. She'd learned that predators existed, that authorities sometimes failed, and that ordinary citizens occasionally had to take extraordinary actions to protect the innocent. "Will she follow our path?" "That's her choice to make," Melody said. "But she'll have the tools and knowledge to protect herself and others. That's the best legacy we can provide." The Montana operation launched exactly 2 weeks later, coordinated between Foundation assets and federal task forces. 47 victims were rescued from conditions that resembled concentration camps more than survivalist compounds. The perpetrators faced federal charges that would result in life sentences for the leadership and decades of imprisonment for accomplices. Media coverage focused on the successful cooperation between private organizations and federal agencies, portraying the Foundation as an innovative model for public-private partnerships in fighting human trafficking. Terrence's role was described as providing resources and expertise, not the tactical leadership that had made the operation possible. 6 months later, Melody announced her engagement to Arthur Krause, a federal prosecutor who'd worked closely with the Foundation on several cases. Arthur understood the Foundation's mission and accepted the necessary secrecy surrounding its more aggressive operations. The wedding was held at the Sanford family compound, surrounded by security measures that guests assumed were routine for wealthy families. Janice served as flower girl, delighting everyone with her enthusiasm and charm. During the reception, Terrence reflected on the path that had brought his family to this point. 5 years ago, he'd been a successful businessman whose daughter had vanished into a trafficking network. Today, he was the head of a family that had saved hundreds of lives and destroyed criminal enterprises across multiple states. The cost had been significant. Family members who'd chosen evil over loyalty, enemies who'd threatened innocent lives, and personal relationships sacrificed for operational security. But the results justified every difficult decision. "Grandpa," Janice said, tugging on his jacket. "Mom says you're a hero." "What's a hero?" Terrence knelt to her level, considering how to explain concepts that had taken him decades to understand. A hero is someone who protects people who can't protect themselves. Someone who stops bad people from hurting good people. "Are you a hero?" "I try to be," Terrence replied honestly. "Every day I try to be." As the celebration continued around them, Terrence made a silent promise to his granddaughter. She would grow up in a world where predators knew that harming innocent people carried permanent consequences. The Foundation would continue its work, expanding operations and increasing effectiveness with each passing year. Some people believed that evil was an inevitable part of human nature, that predators would always exist and victims would always suffer. Terrence had learned a different truth. Evil flourished only when good people chose inaction over intervention. The Sanford family had chosen intervention, accepting the personal cost that came with fighting monsters. They'd built an organization capable of protecting the innocent and eliminating threats that overwhelmed traditional law enforcement. Blood and iron had forged their legacy, blood spilled by those who chose to enable evil, iron determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Future generations would inherit both the responsibility and the resources needed to continue that mission. In a world full of predators, the Sanford family had evolved into apex protectors, and they would never stop hunting.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.